Hi, I'm Husky. For the last 3 months, I've been developing an indie MMO using my own custom game engine I built over the last 4 years. Now, for the last few devlogs, I've mainly been focusing on one specific thing per video and going in depth on each of them, but today I want to try something different. Since over the last 2 weeks I've just been working on a ton of random stuff, I figured this time I'd just go over everything I thought was interesting enough to include. Also, my last 2 videos have been very technical in nature, and I feel bad for the people who watch my videos that have no idea what I'm talking about, so I will also be going back and forth between both technical and more art-related aspects in this video. I've also left timestamps in the description for each subject, so if you don't care about one of them, you can just skip to the next. I want to start this video off with something I've literally not mentioned once in any of my videos. I really like making music. If you ever use SillyPost, then you might know that I composed all the music for the minigames on that website. And while I think the nature of how music is made makes it very difficult to talk about any specific song I've made in depth, I wanted to share a very simple tip I found for making multiple sections in a single song sound good. A lot of my inspiration for this technique came from when I was remaking the theme for Chemical Plant Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog 2 and Renoise, which is my usual music creation program of choice. If you're more familiar with conventional DAWs like FL Studio or Ableton, I suggest you go check out this video by Ahoy on Trackers, as it'll give you some useful insight into why Renoise looks so different. But one thing I noticed while mapping each section of the song is that each measure introduces something new to keep the song sounding interesting. Essentially, it feels like each measure introduces a new idea, and then just before all the accumulated ideas start to get boring, it discards a majority of them to start something different. I'm by no means an expert or even very good at music theory, but if we go through measure by measure here, I'll point out what I mean. Also, apologies in advance for the fact that all of the instruments sound like they've been very poorly emulated. Immediately after the first bar, the bass line is introduced. After the second bar, one of the lead instruments changes its pattern to flow into the new pattern that the lead instruments follow. And once the new lead pattern has been played, the pattern is changed. The same lead instrument as in the third bar now once again signifies that a change is going to happen, which leads into the following section. The song is now vastly different, following a sort of call and response pattern. After just having introduced this new section, it transitions out of it into what almost feels like a solo. Now, I'm by no means saying that you have to make each song you make as dense and unwilling to settle on a single pattern as this. Guidelines in art, just as guidelines drawn with a ruler, are there to help you make something closer to how you envisioned it in your head, not to restrict your vision. However, I think that following the mentality of each section of my song should introduce something new can help with coming up with a fun and enjoyable flow to the song. I think another way you can think about it is to imagine that you're making dubstep, where you have minimal changes between each measure that all lead up into a major change, almost like a bass drop. I don't know if that makes sense, but I like how it sounds, so I'm keeping it in. So remember in the first devlog when I said I was using Blender to make maps for my engine? Well, one day I was just getting so angry at how difficult it was to make Blender work correctly with my BSP code that I just gave in to the temptations that had been plaguing me ever since I started, and decided to rewrite all my tools to support trenchbroom instead of Blender. And this has genuinely been one of, if not the best thing I've done for productivity in map making ever. I know a lot of people swear by trenchbroom for map making, but even besides that, I think the Quake.map format is just so much better for game engines that use BSP trees for collision than trying to get GLTF to output precise geometry without causing weird floating point issues. Now, you could go watch a billion videos on the workflow of trenchbroom, but because I like talking about technical stuff on this channel, I will instead be talking about the Quake.map file format and how I implemented it into my map compiler. So one of the biggest differences between the Quake format and something like GLTF is that it doesn't actually give you a list of polygons for each brush. Instead, it gives you a list of infinitely large planes that are used to define the extents of your brush that your map compiler has to interpret and use to construct the polygons. Now, there's a lot of mathematical ways to describe this, but I think the most intuitive way to think about it is actually how the Quake 1 map compiler uses this information. Let's start by placing an absolutely massive cube in the world. Now, there's no scale visible in this example, but in practice, I've set this cube to be around 4,000 units in size in each direction. Now, let's go through each of these lines in the Quake map file for a single brush and see what happens. For each line, we have an infinite plane defined by 3 points. These 3 points define a triangle, but the triangle itself isn't really important. What we're actually using these for is the normal direction of the triangle, and one of the positions of its vertices. I may go more in depth in the future on the mathematics of this, but no matter what vertex we choose from this triangle, the result will always create the exact same infinitely large plane. We then subtract all contents in front of this plane from the massive cube, and and the resulting face that gets created is given the texture associated with this line. This is then repeated for each of the lines of the brush, giving us the final brush once we go through all of them. Now, I don't have any answers as for why the people at id Software decided to make the format like this. However, I will say that it's both very easy to implement if you already have code written to generate BSP trees, and it also means that you can very easily insert an extra step of shifting the infinite planes to create an inflated BSP tree for axially aligned bounding box sweeps. So I went to a somewhat underground rave last weekend, and while I was there, I was unfortunately that guy at the party and ended up mostly taking a ton of photos of the city scenery around the area for inspiration and texture creation. Now, I won't be sharing these photos because I don't want anything to get shut down or anyone to get arrested. The one major thing that the whole experience inspired me to do was actually create a new map for my game that I fully plan to never include in the actual final game. Instead, my idea was just to play around with making a map inspired by the photos I took, trying to use as many new textures as possible, all to just try and figure out what worked well together, and what ideas I could take and implement back into the main map. Now, there's not really anything to do here, it's basically just an empty slate of scenery to look at without any interactions. However, the whole experience of making this map was very freeing, as I didn't have to worry about either messing anything up on the main map, or more importantly, having to make anything of a good quality. I almost entirely just focused on having fun in the process. I personally think this is a really good method for just figuring out some fun layouts and texture combinations, and speaking of textures, I also want to go over how I make textures, since I have a very specific style I'm aiming for in this game. Most of the textures used in map making and Lightless are based on real photographs, half of which were taken by me and the other half came from unsplash.com. You might have noticed though that the textures don't look like real photos, but instead look like someone lazily recreated them with brushes in MS Paint, and this is actually a filter. Specifically, I use GIMP for all of my drawing and texturing, and this is mainly done with the water pixels filter. I also make heavy use of both the tile seamless filter and the add-on resynthesizer with its heel selection filter. Of course, algorithms like these can only take you so far, so I oftentimes manually clean up textures too with a pixel brush, especially with things like these bricks, which logically make no sense when you look at them for a bit. I think my biggest issue with using GIMP for making textures is that it's not very easy to visualize what the tiling looks like until you're done. There are some tricks that you can do with symmetry painting or the offset layer tool, but having this built in like A-Sprite would be very nice. So, despite the name of my game being Lightless, a lot of my friends were suggesting I add lighting to the game, and while it wasn't something I originally planned, I figured I might as well experiment with it to see what it would look like. I'm still not 100% certain on the look I want to go for this game, but I decided to just kind of experiment with a couple techniques before settling on anything. I'm personally a big fan of pre-calculated lighting instead of doing it at runtime, especially since I'm trying to target more low-end computers with my game, but the first technique I tried was actually somewhat real-time. If you've ever been way too hyperfixated on graphics programming, you may have heard of a technique for shading known as shadow volumes. It was most famously used in Doom 3 for real-time shadows and then quietly faded into obscurity when everyone realized that just generating shadow maps at runtime was way easier. Essentially, the way it works is that we take the mesh that we're trying to generate a shadow for and stretch it in a way where anything facing away from the light gets stretched to a really large value. We then use the stencil buffer to count how many times each pixel renders a front face and a back face of this new mesh, and if the counts are not equal, then we can assume that the back side of this mesh was culled because of something in front of it. And thus, this pixel represents the intersection of the ground with the mesh, and this pixel is now in shadow. Now, I won't be going much more in depth on this technique today because it's actually not what I ended up using. I played around with it for a bit, but ended up deciding against it, mostly because generating the shadow mesh is a bit harder than it sounds. And I just finished writing all that other mesh generation code for trenchbroom, so give me a break, okay? Instead, I decided to do what this one YouTube comment said I shouldn't do, and used ray tracing for my lighting. Not real-time ray tracing, by the way. I don't think the integrated laptop GPUs I'm targeting would be happy about that. Instead, we are doing baked ray tracing. Now, once again, you can just go watch the Matt's Ramblings video on this exact technique to learn how it works, since my version is basically the same. The only real difference of my technique versus the one in Quake 1 is that it supports colored lighting, is slightly more buggy, and is definitely implemented more poorly. Also, despite the fact that I named my program for making these light maps RAD-C, I don't actually do any radiosity calculations. This is all without any bounces and is pretty much just calculating what is in shadow versus what isn't, with a bit of very basic light fall off. Now, because linear filtering would look kind of weird in the art style I'm going for in this game, I actually decided against using it for scaling the light maps and instead went with some very basic dithering. I don't know how much video compression will enjoy this, but I personally think it looks nice, and since I now have this dithering code, I figured I'd also use it to implement some basic transparency support. The way this works is that it uses the Bayer matrix limits for each pixel to decide whether to keep or discard a transparent pixel, and this way I can also avoid having to do any sorting of objects, and any extra passes for transparent objects are entirely avoided. I think the final thing I want to point out about shadows is that I ended up using this random algorithm I found for packing light maps into power of 2 size textures. It actually seems to work pretty well. I've left a link to it in the description, and I wanted to give credit since this seems like a really good way to do this. So despite all of these things having been done, I've actually slowed down a bit on overall major progress on the game for the last 2 weeks. I think I'm mostly trying to avoid total burnout from working on this project pretty much 24/7, but despite that, I have a ton of big features planned that I've been working on in the background, and I'm working very hard to get the game into a good initial state. Some other things that I've implemented that I didn't really talk about implementing were this very basic settings UI, Steam support, proper integer scaling for multiple resolutions so that the text no longer looks awful at anything besides 720p, proper UI scaling so that the text no longer looks tiny on anything besides 720p, and a lot of other stuff to try to make the game work on resolutions that aren't 720p. I've also added some very small new features like doors, and a ton of optimizations to speed up the BSP tree compiler and the nav mesh generator. One other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm switching my donations from LiberaPay to Patreon, since I feel Patreon is more widely recognized and trusted, and also with Patreon I can put people's names at the end of the video like a real YouTuber. I've left a link to the Patreon below if you want to donate. Nothing's locked behind it, and it's entirely optional, but it helps out a ton and is very much appreciated. Also, if you've previously donated through LiberaPay, send me a message on my Discord server and I can add your name to the end of the next video. Okay, that's about it. Bye!